I said it as a joke. He did not look like he thought it was funny. He still doesn't. In my defense, I had spent the morning on a ladder in the cold end of the archive, with ink to my wrists and dust in my teeth. And a person stops weighing her words carefully, somewhere around the 4th hour of that. I was 22, low-born, and the most dangerous thing I owned was a good memory. Nobody summons the apprentice scribe to the Great Hall to hear her opinions. They summon her to carry the book. The book in question was the Mooncant, the old prophecy ledger, and it had been sent for because the court was arguing about it again. My master, Bram, was aibed with a bad chest, so I went in his place with the heavy thing on my hip and the king's whole court turning to look at the girl who was not supposed to be there. I had never stood that close to Sorin, king of the Iron Territories. From the archive, I only ever saw the top of him, the black head bowed over a map 2 floors down, the way the guards went still when he passed. Up close, he was worse. He sat the wolf throne the way other men sit a horse they are not sure they have permission to ride, and the whole hall arranged itself around him like iron filings that had given up arguing with the magnet. "Read the relevant passage," said the Chancellor, who enjoyed the word relevant. "Aloud, so there is no further confusion." So I read it aloud. "When the iron blooms out of its season, and the king's own beast kneels before the king, when frost walks the summer hall, and the laughing one takes the chair that has waited, the cold will have its queen." There was a satisfied murmur. Lady Ingrid, who had been raised since birth to believe the chair that has waited was a piece of furniture with her name carved into the underside, folded her hands and looked serene. And maybe I was tired, and maybe I had heard the word destiny 11 times before noon, but I closed the book and heard myself say, into the lovely hush, well. Someone should tell the chair. A few people laughed. They shouldn't have, and that made it funnier, which is the only mechanism by which I have ever made anyone laugh. I added, because apparently I wanted to die that day, "It's a very old poem, Your Grace." Iron blooming out of season usually means somebody forgot to weed the forge garden. I wouldn't re-roof the castle over it. And the king looked at me. I want to be precise about this, because everything after depends on it. He did not look at me the way you look at an insolent servant, not angry, not amused, not even surprised. He looked at me the way you look at a door you were certain you had locked and have just heard open. For one whole breath, the king of the Iron Territories went perfectly, terribly still, and then, in a voice with no heat in it at all, "Take the book back to the archive," and he turned to the Chancellor as though I had already gone. I left. My ears were ringing. I told myself it was the cold. Here is the part I could not stop turning over for the rest of that night. He had not laughed. He had not corrected me. He had not asked who I was. He had looked like a man watching a thing he had dreaded for years arrive exactly on schedule, and I had no idea yet that I had just read his death sentence out loud and made a joke at the bottom of it. That was the first sign, though I didn't count it as one. The counting started 3 days later. The iron bloomed out of season. I found it on my way to the well, the old thorn apple in the forge yard, the ugly iron hard one that had not flowered in living memory, gone white with blossom in the wrong half of the year. Frost white, every branch of it, in a courtyard where the smiths kept the air too hot for snow. The smith stood staring at it, his hammer forgotten. When he saw me, he stepped back, which I thought strange, then thought nothing of, because a tree is a tree, and trees are sometimes confused. I would have kept thinking nothing of it, except that the wolf was waiting for me at the archive door. I should explain about the wolf. It was the size of a small horse and the colour of a moonless night, and it had spent the whole reign being exactly as terrifying as it was supposed to be. Warriors gave it room, hounds wept and hid. It did not, as a rule, lie across the threshold of the lowest room in the castle like an enormous, badly behaved rug. It did that now. "Move," I told it. It thumped its tail once, with the deep satisfaction of a creature that has found exactly where it intends to be, and did not move. I stepped over it. It watched me work all afternoon with its chin on its paws and its yellow eyes following my hands. And when Gunnar, the king's second, a mountain of a man with a beard he clearly lost arguments to, came to retrieve it, it showed him its teeth. "He won't come," Gunnar reported, with the air of a man who has carried worse news to worse kings. He looked at me. He looked at the wolf. Something moved behind his eyes that I did not like, because it looked like hope. "Huh," he said, and left, and the wolf stayed until moonrise and then let itself out as if it had a key. I want it on record that I did not encourage this. The frost came next, 4 days on, and it came to the summer hall exactly as the poem promised, a skin of ice across the high windows on a warm night, breath smoking in a room full of fires. I was there because the king had ordered the mooncant brought up again, and again I came instead of Bram, and again I stood at the edge of the light while the court pretended a healer's apprentice was a piece of the wall. That was when I caught him watching me. Not glancing, watching, the way you watch a fuse. Across a hall full of the most powerful wolves alive, the king had set down his cup. Too carefully, the way a man does when he is making his hands behave, and fixed on me with an expression I could not read and could not shake. When I met his eyes, on purpose, because I have never been able to leave a closed door closed, he did not look away. He let me see that he was looking. Then frost cracked across the window, with a sound like a held breath letting go, and the whole court turned toward the noise, and by the time they turned back the king was the king again, and I was nobody again, and only the two of us knew that for 1 second the most feared man in the territories had looked at a scribe like she was a wound he'd been waiting to reopen. 3 signs. The poem had 4. I am not a fool, whatever the joke suggested. By then I had stopped sleeping properly. I had taken to reading the mooncant by candle when I should have been copying tax rolls, hunting for the trick of it, the natural cause, the forgotten footnote that would let me put the whole thing down. Because here is the thing nobody in that warm, frightened court seemed willing to say plainly. And I will say it to you now. Because you and I are going to be honest with each other for the next little while, the signs were real. They were arriving in order, and every single one of them was arriving at me. The 4th sign was the chair, and the chair was the part I refused. It sat at the king's right hand at the high table, and it had sat empty for the whole of his reign, and the whole of his father's reign before that, and the court had stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing a grave you pass every day. The laughing one takes the chair that has waited. I had made my joke about that chair. I had no intention of going anywhere near it. The wolf had other intentions. It happened at the autumn feast, in front of everyone, the long tables, the visiting lords, Lady Ingrid seated in the place of honour in a gown, the colour of a fresh bruise. I was carrying a stack of deeds to the Chancellor's man at the side table, head down, doing the one thing a person of my rank is paid to do, which is move through a great hall without becoming part of it. The wolf left the king's feet, crossed the entire length of the hall in front of the assembled nobility of the Iron Territories, took the hem of my sleeve in its enormous teeth with the delicacy of a duchess lifting a teacup, and towed me, deeds and all, to the empty chair. Then it sat down on my foot, so I could not leave. I have never heard a hall go so quiet. 100 faces. The visiting lords, Ingrid's knuckles white around her goblet. And at the head of it all the king of the Iron Territories, on his feet now, one hand flat on the table, looking at his own wolf with the expression of a man whose dog has just proposed marriage on his behalf to a stranger. Anvar, he said. The wolf's name, I assumed. He said it the way you say a name you are about to regret. Anvar, down, Anvar leaned his full and considerable weight into my knees and gazed up at me with adoration so total it was almost rude. I looked at the king looked at me, and I watched it happen on his face. The exact 4 seconds the whole castle would eventually learn to recognise. The 4 seconds in which Soren of the Iron Territories knew precisely what was happening, hated it, and then, helplessly, did nothing to stop it. He could have ordered me from the hall. He could have laughed it off, made it a jest, let the court breathe. Instead, he stood there with his jaw working and let his wolf hold a scribe to the queen's chair in front of every soul who outranked her. And the silence stretched until it was not a silence about a wolf anymore. It was a silence about a king. Forgive me. Someone had to say it. I peeled my sleeve from the beast's teeth, lifted my foot out from under him with as much dignity as the situation allowed, and did not sit in the chair. Your Grace. Your wolf has excellent manners and terrible judgment. Somewhere down the table, Gunnar made a sound into his ale that he turned, too late, into a cough. The king did not smile. But the thing his mouth did, the thing it stopped itself from doing, I have thought about that more times than I will admit. I gathered my scattered deeds off the floor and walked out of the great hall with my back straight and my heart going like a snared bird, and behind me I heard him say, "Lo, to no one, to the wolf, to himself, I know. I know." 2 words. I carried them down to the archive like coals. Lady Ingrid found me the next morning, which was the first time the prophecy stopped being eerie and started being dangerous. She came down into the archive herself, which women like Ingrid do not do, trailing the cold of the upper floors and 2 of her father's men. She was beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, for its single clear purpose. She looked at the ladders and the ink and the mended spines, and then she looked at me as though I were one more thing in the room that had been catalogued incorrectly. "You've been clever," she said. It was not a compliment. The tree, the frost, the dog. "Tell me, do you mix the bloom with your healer's hands, or do you have help?" I set down my pen. "You think I climbed the forge wall and made the thorn-apple flower. I think a still-room girl who reads old books knows a great many things about frost and powders and how to make a feast hall gasp." She stepped closer, and her voice dropped to the register people use for threats they intend to keep. "Here is what will happen. You will take a fever, regrettably, and you will go home to whatever village forgot you. The signs will stop, because you will stop making them. And the chair that has waited will be filled by the woman it was always meant for, and no one will remember the scribe who counterfeited a god's poem to climb above her station." She let that sit. "Or you will not go, and I will have you examined for witchcraft in front of the court, and we will see how your clever hands look when the question is put to them properly." There it was. The first move, and it was a good one, because it did not require me to be guilty, only to be lowborn and alone and standing in the path of a richer woman's future. She had the men. She had the Chancellor's ear. She had a story the court already wanted to believe, because a counterfeit is so much more comfortable than a destiny that picks the wrong woman. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But I have noticed that fear and stubbornness live in the same room in me, and when one stands up, the other tends to follow. I didn't make the tree bloom. I don't know what's happening any more than you do, but I'll tell you what I do know, my lady, since you came all this way. I stood. If that poem were going to pick a woman for being highborn and patient and exactly where everyone wanted her, it would have picked her 100 years ago and saved us all the suspense. Whatever it's doing, it isn't doing what you were promised. I gathered my courage and spent it all at once. You should be angrier at the poem than at me. I just read it out loud. Her face did something ugly and quick before it smoothed. "Examined then," she said pleasantly, and swept out. And I sat back down very carefully because my knees had stopped agreeing to the work. That afternoon the order came, by the Chancellor's seal. The archive apprentice was to be confined to the lower castle pending inquiry into unnatural practices, and was forbidden the great hall. Let me catch my breath here, because this is the point where I stopped being able to laugh any of it off. And before the next part, I'd love to know, has your own quiet life ever started coming true as somebody else's story? Tell me in the comments, I read every one. If hers is a voice you want more of, subscribe and the next one will find you. All right. That night, he came down. For the first time, the king came down to the archive himself. He came alone, without the wolf, which I would later understand was the most honest thing he had done since I met him. He filled the doorway, the way weather fills a valley. I was on the floor with my back to the shelves and a single candle, and I did not get up, partly out of defiance, and partly because I wasn't certain I could. "They tell me you're a witch," he said. "They tell me you're cold. We can't both be wrong." The pause that followed was long enough to repair a spine in. He crossed the room, 3 paces, then a 4th he clearly had not meant to take, and stopped a careful distance away, exactly far enough that neither of us could pretend it was an accident. He looked down at me, at the candle, at the open mooncant in my lap where I had been hunting the trick of it for the 100th time. "You read the old copies," he said, "not the fair ones the court keeps. The old ones, they're truer." I turned the book so he could see the page. The later the copy, the more the truth has worn off it. Scribes tidy. They drop a line they don't understand. They smooth a word that scans badly, and 300 years on the court is reciting a poem with the hard parts sanded off and calling it scripture. I looked up at him. "Why does that matter to you, Your Grace? You've spent 20 years telling this castle the prophecy is a nursery rhyme. The Chancellor quotes you on it. And now there's frost on the windows in autumn and you came down 4 flights of stairs at midnight to ask a witch which copy she reads." He did not answer. He looked at the frost flowering, even now, in the corner of the archive's one high window. To me, the cold had started following me into rooms, and something in his face came apart very slightly at the seams. "Ask me the question you actually came down here to ask." It came out gently, for me. "You've been watching me for 3 weeks like I'm a fuse. I'd like to know what you think I'm going to burn down." "You," he said. It was not what I expected. I expected the king. I got the man, just for a second. The word came out of him stripped, with no throne behind it. Then he caught himself, and the 4 seconds happened, and he straightened back into the King of the Iron Territories, like a sword going home into a scabbard. "Stay confined," he said. "Do not go to the hall. Do not let Ingrid put you in front of the court. Do not," his jaw moved once before he found it, "do not make it easy for the prophecy to finish." And he left, and took all the air in the room with him, and left me with a candle and a poem and the dawning, infuriating suspicion that the most powerful wolf alive was not afraid of me at all. He was afraid for me. I would like to tell you I was patient and wise and waited for him to explain himself. I confined myself to the lower castle for exactly 1 day, and then I went looking for the truth the way I find everything, which is to say, I went to the oldest book in the room. Not the mooncant. The mooncant was a copy, and every copy in the castle descended from one source, and cataloguing is the one power a lowborn girl is allowed, so I knew the source still existed, the founder's hand, the original cant, kept in the king's own keeping in the cold chapel on the cliff where the first kings were burned. Forbidden to me. Forbidden to everyone. So naturally I went at moonrise, with a stolen key and the wolf, who appeared at my heels the moment I stepped outside as though he had waited his whole life to abet a crime. The chapel was a wound in the cliff, all black stone and wind. And it was the coldest place I have ever stood, a cold that did not come off the sea, but out of the ground, out of the very iron in the rock, the cold of the poem made into a room. And in it I found 2 things. The first was a memorial. A row of names cut into the stone, kings and their queens, and beside each king's name a queen's name, and beside each queen's name a single word in the old tongue that I had spent 4 years learning to read, and now wished I could not. The word was unspring. She who did not see the spring. Queen after queen after queen. The cold will have its queen. It had been having them for 300 years. The second thing was the founder's cant, the true original, chained to the altar, and the last line of the prophecy, the line every later scribe had dropped because it did not scan, the line in no copy in the castle, the line the king had let his court forget on purpose. The poem the court knew ended, the cold will have its queen. The true poem went on, and the cold will pass from him to her, and of the two, one will not see the spring. I stood in that freezing dark with the wolf leaning warm and anxious into my leg, and understood, all at once, what I had read aloud in the great hall while making a joke at the bottom of it. The prophecy was not a love story the court had turned grim. It was a death the court had turned into a love story. Every Iron King's fated mate took his cold into her body when the bond completed, and died of it. That was the chair that waited. That was what waited in it. And Soren, who had spent his reign swearing the prophecy, was a rhyme, who kept the true copy chained in the one room no one could reach, who had looked at me across a frozen hall like a man watching a fuse, had not been resisting me out of pride, or rank, or a cold heart. He had read this line as a boy. He had watched his own mother's name go onto this wall. He had spent 20 years refusing to find his mate at all, because he had decided, long before any scribe made a joke, that he would rather be alone forever than complete a prophecy that ended with her in the ground. Every cold thing he had done was the warmest thing anyone had ever done for me. He had been trying to lose me on purpose, to save my life. Oh, to the wolf, to the dark, to the names on the wall. Oh, you idiot. You magnificent idiot. The wolf licked my hand, behind me, from the chapel door. A voice I had read a death sentence to said, very quietly, you were supposed to stay confined. He had followed the wolf. Of course he had. He stood in the doorway of the worst room in his kingdom with the wind tearing at him, and the truth open on the altar between us. And for once neither of us reached for a joke. Your mother, I said. And her mother before her. He came in. 3 paces. The 4th he did not take. The cold in that room was a 3rd person standing between us, and he would not bring me closer to it. Now you understand why I called it a rhyme. A rhyme cannot come true. So I made it a rhyme. I told the court, I told the chancellor, I told myself. For 20 years it worked. His eyes went to the frost spreading from where I stood, blooming up the black stone, reaching for me. And then a girl carried the book up to my hall and read the wrong line out loud and laughed at it, and my wolf, his voice did the thing, the breaking at the seams thing. My wolf has wanted nothing in 20 years, and he stood up the moment you spoke, so you watched me. And you said the prophecy was finishing, and you wanted to know what I'd burn down, and the answer was yourself. You said it was me. You meant. I meant you, he said. I meant the spring you won't see. I have buried this bond for 2 decades to keep it from a woman I had never met, and then it chose the one person in the territories who looks at me like I'm a man and not a wall, and I find He stopped. The king of the Iron Territories, who had a word for every law in the land, ran out of words. I find I cannot do it again. I cannot put another name on that wall. Especially not yours. There are moments that ask everything of you at once, and they never announce themselves. I was cold to the bone, and frightened, and a richer woman was preparing to have me burned for witchcraft 4 floors above us, and the most powerful man alive had just told me, in the only language he had, that he had been protecting me since the day I made him a joke. And I was reading. Even then. Because that is what I am, and because the cold was crawling up my arms and I needed something to do with my eyes that was not his face. I was reading the last line again, and the line under the last line, the one cut so small and so old that it had never made it into any copy at all, the one the founder had carved and the very next scribe had been too frightened or too tidy to keep. Soren, I said, his name. The first time. It landed in that frozen room like a coal. Read the bottom line. The little one. Read it in the old tongue, not the court tongue. He came to the altar. He read it. I watched him read it, watched 20 years of grief stop in him like a clock with a finger laid against the pendulum. The court poem said, "Of the two, one will not see the spring." The founder's hand said, "Of the two, one will not see the spring, who comes to the cold unwilling." Unwilling, my teeth were chattering now. The frost had reached my collar. They dropped it because it didn't scan. 300 years of scribes tidied a conditional out of a prophecy and turned a choice into a sentence. Your mother, Soren. Was your mother given a choice? Was any of them? Or were they claimed, chosen for them, told fate had picked them and handed the cold like a crown they never asked to wear? His face. I will not try to describe his face. Unwilling, he said. It isn't the bond that kills the queen, it's the bond she didn't choose. The cold takes the one who comes to it unwilling. Every name on this wall was a woman handed a destiny, not one of them was ever asked. The frost was in my lungs now, an iron hand closing. The magic in that room had understood what I was about to do, and did not like it. I made myself smile at him, because if I was going to do an enormous and badly judged thing, I wanted him to remember me doing it on purpose. So ask me. No, he said. No, you don't know that it. Ask me, Soren. He did not ask. He is, I have mentioned, an idiot, a magnificent one. And his first instinct when the woman he loves offers to save his life is to refuse on her behalf. So I did the asking for him. I put my hand flat on the founder's altar, on the iron of it, on the source of the cold, and I chose it. I want to be exact, because everyone always asks, and because the choosing was the whole of it. I did not let the cold take me. I reached out and took the cold. I called the bond up out of the frozen ground and the frozen stone and the frozen man behind me, and I pulled it into myself the way you pull a drowning thing out of a river, willing, both arms, my whole weight, and it came. It came like winter deciding to live in a person. The frost drove up my arm and into my ribs, and the breath went out of me in a white plume and did not come back. My palm split on the iron edge of the altar, and the blood that welled up froze before it fell. Somewhere very far away, the wolf was screaming, a sound I did not know wolves could make, and Soren had his hands on my shoulders, not pulling me back. He had finally understood. He was holding me up, and the names on the wall blazed with their old hunger, the cold crushing the air from my lungs with the weight of every destiny ever forced on a woman who was not asked. And I held on. That was all. That was the entire trick of it, the thing no chained scribe had ever been allowed to find. I held on. And I did not stop choosing it, not for 1 second, not when the cold reached my heart and squeezed, not when my vision went white at the edges. I will not be a name handed a crown, I thought, with the last warm thought I had. I am a woman who climbed the wall on purpose. The cold reached my heart and found it already decided, and a thing that has only ever known how to take the unwilling did not know what to do with a woman who had come and got it herself. It broke. It did not pass through me and kill me. It passed through me and went out, the way a fever breaks, the way frost goes off a window when the sun finds it, all of it, 20 years, 300 years, the whole inherited winter of the Iron Kings pouring out through a healer's apprentice, too stubborn to die on a schedule. The chapel ran with meltwater. The names on the wall went quiet. The cold that had lived in Soren since the night they burned his mother went out of him in one long shudder, and he made the sound I had heard once before, the night he said I know to an empty hall, and then I was on the floor in his arms with my split hand bleeding warm onto the thawing stone, and he was saying my name like it was the only word that had survived. Ren, look at me. Ren, I'm here. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which is a thing I have always been able to do and never more glad of. I saw the spring, Soren. I'm looking at it. You would think that would be the end of the danger. You would be forgetting Lady Ingrid, who did not care in the slightest what the founder's hand actually said, and who had spent the night arranging the other ending. We came up from the cliff at dawn, the king carrying a half-frozen scribe through his own castle in front of every guard who would later swear they had seen it, which is its own kind of declaration, and walked directly into the trap she had set in the Great Hall. She had the Chancellor, her father's men, and the visiting lords assembled. And a story already told, the witch had been caught at the forbidden site practicing unnatural rites, and the king himself was clearly under her working. See how she had bound even the royal wolf. The fire was, regrettably, already being discussed. Her final move, and it was nearly perfect, because the only man who could stop it was the man she had just accused of being enchanted, and any word he said in my defence would only prove her right. She had thought of everything except what he was willing to lose. Soren set me on my feet. I could stand, barely, and I chose to. And he walked into the centre of his own court, and he did the most expensive thing I have ever watched a proud man do. He told the truth. For 20 years, he said, to the assembled nobility of the Iron Territories, in the voice that did not need to be raised, I have told you the prophecy was a children's rhyme. I lied. I have the founder's cant. I have read it since I was 9 years old, the night we burned my mother, who was given the cold and never given a choice. The hall did not breathe. Every queen on that wall was claimed without her consent and died of it. I swore I would never put another woman in that chair. He turned, and he looked at me, in front of all of them, and he stopped pretending, for the first time since I had known him. The king stopped pretending he was not watching me. And then this woman, whom I confined, whom I tried to send away, whom I have done everything in my power to keep from her own fate. This woman read the line your scribes lost for 300 years, walked into the coldest room in my kingdom against my direct order, and chose the cold no one ever let my mother refuse. She broke it. The wall is quiet. Go and look. His jaw moved. She is not my witch, she is my queen, if she'll have a king who tried this hard to lose her. So think very carefully, Lady Ingrid, before you ask me to burn the woman who fulfilled it. You could have heard a candle gutter. And Ingrid, give her this. She did not fold quietly, Ingrid said, the chair was promised, and got no further, because I had found my voice, and a king had just spent his entire reputation buying me the room to use it. The chair was never promised to you. Quietly, unembellished, the way the truth is most expensive. It was a grave, my lady. For 300 years it was a grave, and your father was lining you up to lie down in it and calling it an honour. I just dug everyone in this room out of it, including you. You're welcome. I looked at the Chancellor, who was discovering an urgent interest in his own boots. Go and look at the wall. The frost is gone from the whole castle. Then come back and tell me again which of us was counterfeiting a god's poem. They went and looked. A court will follow whoever tells the truest story, and for once the truest story was mine. They came back changed. Ingrid's father, who had built his whole house on a chair that turned out to be a tomb, went pale and quiet, and the silence in the hall stopped being about a witch, and became at last about a king who had just knelt. Actually knelt. On the stone of his own hall, and taken a healer's apprentice's bleeding hand in both of his, and bowed his forehead to it like a man at an altar. Ask me, I told him, because someone had to make him do it, and because I had earned it. Wren, he said, low over my hand, not caring who heard the most feared man alive beg. Will you? Of your own will. With every name on that wall as my witness that I am asking and not claiming. He looked up. Will you stay? And the kiss that answered him, I will only tell you that it was not careful, and that something in me that had been bracing for the cold my whole life finally set the weight down. That I understood, with the whole court watching and the wolf howling in triumph somewhere out in the thawing dark, that I had spent 22 years being overlooked and had walked into the great hall one. Ordinary morning and been, for the first time seen, then I stopped thinking in words. That part is mine. Lady Ingrid did not burn anyone. Her father's house was stripped of its honours within the month, not for ambition, the king said, ambition being the natural weather of courts, but for 3 generations of knowing what the chair was and lining their daughters up to die in it anyway. She was sent to a holdfast in the north to think about the difference between a destiny and a death, and as far as I know she is thinking about it still. The Chancellor kept his post, on the grounds that a man that frightened of being wrong can be trusted never to do anything interesting again. I married the king. You will have guessed. It is 6 months on now, and high summer, and there is no frost anywhere in this castle, but the kind that belongs in cellars and on cakes. I am writing this from the archive, which the king tried to have moved somewhere grander and warmer, and was told by me that it was fine where it was, and who is the king to argue with the queen about books? Bram recovered and pretends to disapprove of all of it, and last week I caught him weeping happily over the founder's cant, which we have unchained and recopied, every line this time, the conditional restored, so that no scribe 300 years from now sands the choice back out of it and buries a girl in a poem. The wolf Anvar sleeps across our door now, which the guards find very moving, and which I find means I trip over him every single morning. He has not brought me a single stolen object since the wedding. I asked Gunnar why, once, and Gunnar, who is godfather now to nothing yet but lives in hope, scratched the great black head and said, "He's done his job, my lady. He spent 20 years trying to throw the king at someone. He finally landed it. Then he grinned into his beard, cost the king a door he can no longer use, a feast he will never live down, and every shred of his dignity. Worth it. There is a chair at the high table at the king's right hand, and it is not empty anymore, and it is not a grave, it is just mine. I sit in it every night, the laughing one in the chair that waited, and most nights I catch Soren looking at me across it, the way he looked at me that first morning, like a door he was certain he'd locked, swinging open onto something he had stopped letting himself want. Except now when I catch him at it, he doesn't go still and he doesn't pretend. He just lets me see. I said it as a joke. He never thought it was funny. He was right, as it turns out. It was the truest thing I ever said, so tell me, did you see it coming? Did you guess what was really carved at the bottom of that wall before I did? Or did he fool you the way he fooled me? All that cold, hiding all that fear. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I read every one, the way I read everything, hunting for the line somebody almost lost. And if you want her side of the next story, stay close, subscribe, and the cold will never have you either. Moon and Iron. Her side of it, all the way through.